You're listening to the Staffa Corner podcast, a Staffa-tarian look at entertainment and life with your host, Greg Staffa.
Douglas Vermeeren joins us today from Vancouver. Douglas, how are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So, first question right off the bat, regulator in the Billy the Kid series. Is your character still alive or dead?
No, he's dead, unfortunately.
Right.
Actually, it's funny, a lot of the films I'm in, that's kind of the way it ends up for me.
I know.
But yeah.
I know they just started, or they just announced season 3, and that's one of my personal favorite shows. And so I was curious when you guys were going to start filming again. But if you were dead, then you probably don't know. So I just wanted to get that out.
Well, it is an ongoing series. So, I can kind of answer a little bit of that. I know that, they're shooting in Alberta, close to the city of Calgary in Canada. And, obviously as the season's running, they actually kind of go, almost a regular season. So, yeah, it'll be up and starting. My guess, my best guess is they're still working on some of it now. They'll probably take a hiatus closer to the holidays and then kick it right off again as we finish that.
Billy the Kid is one of my favorite kind of history people, and big fan of the show. I have a love-hate relationship with the show, but other than that, I overall enjoy it. So seeing that you were a regulator, I just had to get that out of the way first. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Were you always in Vancouver? Is that where you're born and raised?
No, I'm actually from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. So I started as an actor there when I was a kid. In fact, one of the first things that I did was for a CBC after-school special. And then, funny enough, I was acting all throughout, high school and stuff. And I actually used to skip school to go be on movie sets just because I loved it more than school. I mean, who wouldn't, right? So that's kind of how my journey really began, and I knew that I wanted to be involved in film. And then I went to film school. When I was in college, I studied film, and now I kind of go wherever they need me. In fact, I just got back from Los Angeles yesterday working on a film called Alien Horde for Mahal Empire. And funny enough, I get killed in that one too, which is hilarious. One of the main bad guys in that. But yeah, it's great. And now, of course, I live out in Vancouver.
Now, your bio says that you, at an early age, did stunts, and at 13 years old was your first stunt riding on the roof of a speeding car. Is that a little bit of revisionist history, or is that something that you can? I mean, to me, when I first read it, that's called being a dumb kid. But
basically.
But to chalk it up now as on your resume, having it that way, can you tell us a little bit about what that was?
Well, it's kind of funny because there's actually a photograph of that stunt on my Instagram. So you can actually see that stunt of where I rode on top of that car. And it was for, a student project that we were doing. And what's funny is I recently ran into the gentleman who owned that car, and he thought it was kind of funny too because he didn't know about it. It was one of his kids that brought that car to the set. But that day, quite frankly, without adult supervision and without proper stunt equipment or a stunt coordinator, I did several stunts that day that were probably not super smart. The car one was one of them, but I also that same day hung off the side of a building without any equipment or anything, just kind of by my fingernails, and had friends pull me up at the end of that stunt. Since then, obviously, we've learned there's a smart way and a not so smart way to do stunts. It's funny, one of the last bigger stunts that I did is I did a full body burn while I was over in the UK. So they lit me on fire head to toe, and there's a right way again to do that and a bad way to do that. And I'm so glad I didn't know about doing those kind of stunts when I was a kid, because I probably would have lit myself on fire too, which I don't recommend.
I just think that's amazing that you can go and look at your child. I mean, I'm thinking of my own childhood and the stupid things I did, wondering how I can incorporate that into my resume. This was an actual stunt, so
right.
It does count as.
Well, I have to confess, there's one stunt that I tried to do as a kid that didn't go off well. No one got hurt, thank goodness. But what I tried to do when I was a kid is actually light some girl's hula hoop on fire and drive my bike through it. And the hula hoop melted before we could get a chance to go through it. And so I ended up having to break open my piggy bank and give this poor girl some money to get her hula hoop restored. So, but that was the first one that I probably did. I must have been maybe, I don't know, 8 at the time, something like that.
I just think that's amazing that you had that intuition and drive such an early age. So, do you consider yourself an actor who does stunts or a stuntman who acts?
I started as an actor, and I think I've always been an actor, but I guess it's a very gray line to kind of look between the two. The reality is, I've always just been willing to do whatever it has taken for the role, right? Sometimes, it's been a matter of will you do the stunt? And then there's been movies where they have hired me specifically for either stunts or doubling or these kinds of things. Like that's what I did on Open Range with Kevin Costner and Robert Duvall and Annette Bening and that gang. But there's been other movies where they've allowed me to also do a character there and do the stunt work for that character. So each project is very, very different. I'm not really sure what I consider myself, but one thing is for sure, I am a bit of an adrenaline junkie, and that's probably what keeps me doing stunts. Generally, how should we say, even the lifestyle of stunts, whether I'm in front of camera or not. So I'm a mixed martial artist. I specialize obviously in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I've got a background in a variety of other martial arts like Shotokan, Goju Kai. I've done Aikido and Wing Chun and Kempo. I do fencing, with the sword play. I also love motorcycles and do race car stuff. So, it's just kind of who I am, my lifestyle. I just have always been drawn to sort of those adrenaline activities, right? So I guess it's just me. I'm a bit of both.
We look at like Tom Cruise doing his own acting and stunts, and you doing your own acting and stunts. Is there kind of that fine line where you would leave something up to the stunt person, or is this always something that you're always constantly driving yourself to do? And if you haven't done it before, you're willing to kind of take that risk, or is there a certain point where you just
Well,
say, you know what, no, I'm not going to do it?
yeah, that's an interesting question. The reality is even Tom Cruise has certain things that the insurance companies will not allow him to do on a movie because obviously they're incredibly dangerous. I know we've all heard the story about him saying, well, if a stunt coordinator won't let me do it, it's time to get a new stunt coordinator.
Yeah.
That's not always true. It sounds pretty macho and cool when you say it, but the reality is you're there to make a movie first and foremost. You're not there to wind up, in an ambulance somewhere. So there are certain stunts that, quite frankly, they're not possible for the performer to do. But also nowadays, we've got some very clever stunt coordinators, and we've got technology that sometimes allow us to do things that are incredibly impossible, but we can do them, right? And I think it's also important to notice that, I've mentioned stunt coordinators. Most big stunts that I've done, we have a team that's on the set, and they will help us find the safest way to do it. And I have had some stunt coordinators simply say the way that, say, the director is looking to do it, it's not the best way. They'll redo that whole sequence in a way that's much safer, but it still looks good on film. So I don't know. I personally think that if you've got a good team around you, chances are very likely that you'll have no problems. It'll come off safe and it'll look really great. So yeah, I don't think there's anything that I wouldn't do if my team kind of helps me figure out the logistics of it. But yeah, from time to time, things don't always go as planned. I mean, we're dealing with a lot of factors that put together a stunt, and sometimes people can get hurt. But for the most part, I haven't really seen a lot of those injuries occur for people on set, right?
Given the safety that is involved in the team aspect, the crews that are involved in making sure it's as safe as possible, do you think more actors should not do the bigger stunts, jumping off a cliff and on a motorcycle type stuff, but do you think more actors should get more involved in some of the physicalities, or have we become so easy to say if you're going to trip and fall, we're going to have a stunt person do the fall, even though it's 2 feet to the ground?
Well, I think it's a personal choice. And by the way, recently I was over at the Warner Brothers lot, and they were talking a little bit about the history of stunts. And it used to be that any staircase that you'd go up that's over 3 steps used to be considered a stunt, and people would be paid more for that. The reality is more accidents, I think, happen on set of people tripping over cables or, bumping into equipment than really with the stunts. But I guess to answer your question the easiest way, I think that's really a decision that all performers need to make for themselves. And I'm not going to suggest that, everybody should start doing stunts, because I also want to keep my stuntman friends employed. I think that's an important thing too, is that's a very specific role. But there's a lot of actors that do a lot of their own stunt work or attempt to do their own stunt work for some things even as simple as fights and what have you. But then there's also some performers in the history of film that have chosen not to necessarily do certain things. And let's be honest, there may be private medical conditions there that they are, maybe struggling with or what have you. And, it's not for me to say, hey, they should be doing their stunts. I think that's, again, a personal decision. In fact, I don't know if you knew this, but in Roger Moore's contract, when he played James Bond, one of the things that he suggested is he will not run, that he never wanted to run. And I don't know his reasons for that. That's probably something personal. But, I feel very bad if people were shaming him, and he actually had some kind of a medical circumstance where that was just difficult for him to do. So, again, it's a personal choice, and I don't know, it's just unfair really for us to expect that. If a performer says, I'm not really willing to do that, it's probably better to just find a stunt person who can make that look good, and let's keep stuntmen employed, right?
Now, am I correct? There is no Oscar or award.
Not yet. In fact, it's interesting, speaking back to James Bond, probably the most recognized stunt in the history of movies came from the James Bond series, but most of the accolades that they have received were actually from the Guinness Book of World Records, right? For either, the highest, jump, the biggest this, the biggest that, the most flips of a car, etc. Those are the accolades that they've mostly received. But I really do think that there should be more respect given to stunt performers. It's definitely something that, I believe most stunt performers that I've worked with, especially with the physicality, they're trained to the level of a professional athlete most times. And so, I think that they should be recognized for that.
Well, and the risks, too, that are involved.
Yep, it can be. Yeah, in fact, I think the movie The Fall Guy was a great depiction of that. I don't know if you've seen that already with Ryan Gosling, but, if somebody has an injury or an accident or something, they're on the sidelines, they're benched. I mean, same as a professional athlete. Sure, there's insurance policies that will help to some extent, but for the most part, that person will be out of work until they either can recover or find another way to become useful. Some of them actually do come out as advisors instead of, performing the stunts themselves. But, it's a really difficult position if you're injured.
And speaking of awards, I think that film got Guinness Book for the most car flips in a scene.
Yeah, it could be. It used to be held by Casino Royale, the James Bond movie, but I'm not sure if that record's been broken or not. I think that they did 17 rolls or something like that in the car, but I can't remember.
So now, growing up in Canada, there's a lot of Canadian, I mean, you guys have your own TV shows and everything like that, but a show like Due South was the first Canadian-made series to have a primetime slot here on a major U.S. network. That was in 1994. Flashpoint was another series in 2009. With so many shows being filmed in Canada that are U.S., why aren't there more Canadian shows being filmed and shown here in the U.S.?
Well, I think that there's a lot of factors that play into that, so I mean, how much time do we have to really analyze it all? We certainly do have the talent here. There's a lot of really very talented people here. And then, as you know, they're shooting a lot of U.S. shows here, which do find their way onto U.S. network with a lot of Canadians involved, right? So, I really can't answer all the specifics, but I do think that, that one of the biggest challenges is always finding a distribution point and also funding. So, sometimes, I don't know. I mean, I'm just sharing again my opinion, so we'll see what kind of hate mail we get. I think sometimes in Canada they tend to lean more on culturally relevant type shows to them. We see a lot of funding that goes to people that are, sharing Canadian stories or stories around Canadian culture, or you see things that are money heading to specific groups to help tell their stories. And while those stories are important, I don't think that I would disagree that they need to be made. But the reality is I think the American market is looking more specifically towards entertainment and films that are going to give a return. So they're more about the financial return on a film rather than the cultural relevance of a film. And because of that, let's be honest, you've got to give the audiences what they want to see. And I don't think the audiences are necessarily craving some of these cultural shows, or in the U.S., why would they care about certain aspects of Canadian history? So I think that that's really a big factor, is just the funding isn't there. And, the distributors aren't ready to, to share too many Canadian stories to foreign markets. I mean, they may play well here, and they also serve a certain demographic. Like, let's be honest, I think the generation that pays the most to come and see a movie are rather looking for something to be entertained, not to be educated. So I think there's, again, some challenges that are there. I do want to be clear, though, that I think that there is a place for everyone's story, and even the education-based or the cultural-based things are great, but I do feel like there needs to be a bit of a balance if we're going to compete in the global marketplace of film, right?
It's just amazing that so many U.S. companies go to Canada to film, yet Canada can't seem to produce their own stuff that is globally recognized.
And then sometimes it is important to recognize that some of the stuff that is being globally recognized is produced in Canada. So, for example, one of my friends, Kyle Bell, did the movie Skinamarink, which is a scary movie. And it's produced in a city called Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And he's done very well with it internationally. In fact, I believe even Rolling Stone magazine listed it as one of the top 10 scary movies of the year. And so, those films are out there. I don't think a lot of people understand that they are Canadian or being produced in Canada. So that's another question is it being recognized? But I do think, if we're talking about, again, Canadian people making American films, I guess to some extent you could argue that those are somewhat Canadian films too then, right? Because it's Canadian crews, often Canadian talent, but perhaps maybe the money and the distribution on them are American. And I think one of the reasons that they're mostly made up here in Canada, obviously we've got the exchange rate. Every time someone crosses the border, they're earning 30%, which means if you've got a movie that's, let's just make the numbers easy, $1 million budget, suddenly that becomes a $1.3 million movie. And then you've also got the tax incentives. So different areas, and not just Canada, but they're all, different states in the U.S., even different countries in Europe and so forth, they have tax considerations that they give to attract production to their location. And sometimes those tax credits can be quite enormous. And so, they obviously are built to encourage filmmakers to spend money in their communities. So a lot of times they will hire talent from those areas. So, for example, where I am in British Columbia, the tax credits do require that a certain amount of either cast or crew be locals, because that brings, financing into the community. That's kind of why they're heading up here. That's why they're heading to other places. That's why, quite frankly, there's still a lot of production going on in Los Angeles, but there's a lot of runaway production going to other states, other countries. That's why you see so many shows being shot abroad. It's because of those tax credits and often the exchange rate. And quite frankly, right now, a lot of the major streamers don't really care if the project is unionized because they've just got to supply content to their subscribers. So I don't know, the world in film is changing. And then let's be honest also that the technology to make great films is becoming so much more accessible. So I think the bar is being lowered to allow other people around the world, wherever they may be, to create some really great projects.
As an actor, you just mentioned it, streaming has really blown up the last few years. As an actor, do you see an impact on how you approach the business or how you're treated in the business? Is that something that is a big change from going from like a major studio to now doing a streaming series? Is that all pretty balanced out now, or is there still kind of a world of difference?
I think that, the world is still finding its way through streaming. Obviously, I come from a generation, and so do you, that kind of straddles the theatrical release versus the streaming service. And we see more and more films that are not getting theatrical releases and they're going straight to streaming. So I think there's a couple things. I think, quite frankly, and I know I'm going to get some hate mail for this, I think that a lot of the unions are kind of out of touch on what's really going on, because you can't expect to have royalties and things that are paid out when someone gets like a subscription, let's call it $20 or whatever, and then that month they end up watching 50 movies, right? Mm-hmm. How are you supposed to divide that kind of money amongst that? So the royalties are really being affected. I also think that the day of the big movie star with, getting paid $20 million a movie is gone. The reality is that might have worked in a theatrical setting where people are paying, $12 to go see a movie. But the reality is when you flip onto your Netflix, you're not looking for the latest Tom Cruise necessarily. You're looking at all kinds of shows, and you just happen to stumble across a thumbnail. You don't even get a trailer, but a thumbnail that has Tom Cruise on it. Well, you may watch that, but you may not be there specifically for that. So I think, if we really look at what the future of it, I think we're going to see, yes, there'll be, just like on YouTube and so forth, we have influencers and people that are popular and draw audiences to them. I think that'll be that, but there's no way they can afford to pay them 20 million when they've got, so many other projects that are also, being watched by people. So I think we're going to see sort of an evening out. There will be still celebrities that make good money, but I don't think it'll be the 20 million. And I think we're going to see some stars emerge that, let's be honest, I mean, Netflix doesn't really have to do a lot of advertising to get you to watch a movie. They need to do advertising to get you to become a subscriber. Yeah. So I think we're going to also see more of this, sort of co-op type advertising where they're advertising, 10 or 15 different movies in one trailer. And people are going to then make their choice when they get there, right?
I think COVID had a lot to do with it. But I think that just the timing of
Yeah.
streaming had a lot to do too. I mean, I remember the days where if you were an actor and you had a straight-to-video release, that was kind of the unwritten signal that your career was winding down. But now releasing something on streaming, I mean, we're seeing Adam Sandler return for Happy Gilmore 2 on Netflix. We're seeing Beverly Hills Cop 4 on Netflix. So we're
Right.
seeing things become much more acceptable. We're seeing Hollywood actors like Harrison Ford appearing on TV series on streaming
Right.
because that kind of blurs the definition between Hollywood actor, big movie star to TV is no longer there.
Right. Well, I think also TV has changed dramatically too, because it's no longer sort of a commercial funded type venture. We've now got streaming services that they're creating programs to be binge watched. And are they really TV? Not like they used to be, because obviously even the censorship codes and things are totally different. Like I think if you look at what HBO did and Showtime, again, it was a pay-per-view style television experience. But you had shows like The Sopranos, or even if we look at Breaking Bad, and I love those shows. They're absolutely awesome. So this is not a complaint. But we see that the violence was totally different than what we saw on regular TV. So was the language. There was also things like nudity and other components that the regular censors would not allow on television. And so television started becoming more like a movie. And I think that was one of the big differences that, if we look at during the 70s, 80s, and even 90s, that really made a big difference for TV versus film, is that TV was considered sort of the lesser, sort of tamed version of entertainment. And we didn't see the kind of, grittiness that we do now on television programs. So the industry has definitely changed. And I don't know, like I said, also now there's technology available to people that really can produce some great stuff without a lot of expense to it. In fact, one of the things that I also on the board of directors for is a service called NetIndie, which is a streaming service specifically for short film content. And I think that that's another thing that we haven't really seen before until things like YouTube. Like, people would have to watch a full television program or what have you. But the reality is we're all busy people. A lot of us, let's call it, have ADD because of all the digital things coming at us. And I think that the future of short film is going to explode, because most of us, we don't have the time to watch long content stuff. So there's definitely a demand for them. But I think the challenge with things like YouTube is they're not compensating the filmmakers enough to make it viable to create like short film content or programming for that. So that's one of the things that we're trying to correct, is we actually pay the filmmaker a reasonable amount of money, rather than you having to struggle to monetize it through a free service like YouTube, and you're right up alongside kitty cat videos or, fail blogs, or like, I mean, there's a, how should we say it? There's a panache, if you will, that comes with being part of a service that's a legitimate distribution outlet versus just a free channel that anybody can kind of crowd around and watch. And I think that that's what filmmakers really need, is to separate themselves from all of the, the free content that's showing up on YouTube, and demonstrate a higher quality of content. And that I think is going to go a long way to helping them in the long run to establish themselves as filmmakers, right? Regardless if it's short form or features.
I've been acting for a while. The explosion of streaming services, have you seen a diminish in writing talent, acting talent, directing talent? Is that getting overly watered down, or is it?
I think we've seen this all the time. Like if we look at when home video became a big thing, there was a rush to create video to fulfill that need. And of course, you had all kinds of lower budget films that came out. Sometimes the acting quality was definitely not Academy Award worthy, but people knew what they were buying, so no one was disappointed. The writing, the same thing. Some things were just rushed out the door. In fact, if we look at like I call it the slasher epidemic, when we saw shows like Friday the 13th and Halloween become so popular, and they were very well done, but we immediately saw an incredible number of imitators that came that were just looking to fill that void. And obviously, they made money and people were interested to see them. I think we're seeing the same thing now, right? Like we've always seen it, even if you look at like, sort of during the 70s, the exploitation films, these are not something new. So we've got just different levels of filmmakers, and some filmmakers are content to be producing quality at a certain level, like just to get films out and large numbers of content. And then others are, I'm going to just call them, more concerned about the art of film. And they're really taking their time to craft amazing scripts to make sure their films are well cast, that they're well shot, that they're, these art pieces. Now, is one better than the other? I don't think so, because there's audiences for both, right? So I think it's just a matter, of you as an artist. You get to decide where you want to be. Are you here to make a lot of content and maybe quite a bit of cash or tons of low budget things, or are you here to create legacy pieces? There's no wrong answer. It's just you get to decide. And then obviously we cross our fingers that you can find your audience, because there's some people that, no kidding, they love just a simple popcorn movie and they're not wanting to find something too deep to think about. And I'm that way too. It depends on my mood. Like I love some, let's call them cheesy, funny, silly, easily put together movies. Sometimes they make me giggle and I enjoy them. And then there's moments in my life where I'm like, I would prefer to see something that just is a well-built, well-acted, well-written film. So again, there's no answer. I think there's room for everybody.
Growing up, you attribute your love of film to films like Star Wars, Indiana Jones, kind of those classic films of my generation. Who do you think their inspiration, or who should they be looking at for that same kind of inspiration these days? I know Spielberg is still around, but
yeah, and you know what? My tastes have also changed over the years. Obviously, when I was a kid and I saw Star Wars, like probably most of the major filmmakers out there today, they were very influenced by it. It was an incredible, pivotal moment in the history of cinema. But I think for me, like when I went to film school, I took a course called film analysis, which was probably the best thing I could have ever done. And during the course of that film, over one semester, we had to watch at least 100 films. Many of them were films I'd never heard of, and many of them were even foreign films that I had no idea who these filmmakers were. And so I fell in love with films that I never knew existed, and it really broadened my spectrum of what film could be, right? And, I also, of course, fell in love with so many of the actors from those different films, and some of them, like I say, are foreign actors from faraway places that I'd never heard their name. And so I think if a person wants to become a filmmaker today, and again, this is just my opinion, certainly start with the things that you love and know, the things that gave you the passion to want to become a filmmaker, but then watch every movie you possibly can. And while I was doing that course, I was generally watching about 3 movies a day, just to even get through that semester. And even today, when I'm not on set, and sometimes even when I still am on set, like going home back to the hotel, I'm not the guy that goes out and parties with everybody. I'll go home and I will actually watch movies. And I'm also the guy that, funny enough, when I go to the theater, you'll see me sitting near the front because I bring a notebook and I'm taking notes, and I need the light from the screen to be able to see what I'm writing. So I think if you're going to be a filmmaker, you've got to take this art very seriously. No kidding. I recently ran into somebody who, he's a friend of mine, and he wants to be a filmmaker, and he's done quite a few, small projects, but I'm surprised that he just isn't watching movies more regularly, right? Like he needs, in my opinion, he needs to be watching movies to be able to become a filmmaker. It's one of those things where unless you know kind of what's out there, you can't really be part of the conversation effectively. And if you're heading to LA, what's funny to talk about movies, you better know movies really well, because people talk in shorthand. I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting doing a scene and the director will say, "Okay, you remember the scene from say, Bullet, or the 7-Year Itch, or way back in North by Northwest or something. Do you remember those scenes? This is kind of what I'm looking for. Well, if you don't know those movies, you're just kind of standing there going, oh, wow, I don't know. Or if somebody says, the Bicycle Thieves and, some of the films from Federico Fellini or, some of these people, you better know your movies. I think it's a really important thing. If you're going to work in that industry, you need to become immersed in the movie industry.
I believe, I could be wrong on this, so don't fully quote me. I believe Tom Cruise has the same philosophy where he tries to watch a movie a day.
Cool.
And, and one of the things I've been amazed by is some of these A-list Hollywood actors, how deep they are into knowledge of film and how much they're watching film. I think.
Well, look at Tarantino. He is probably the most knowledgeable guy on the planet. I'm so impressed. I just actually watched some videos that he had done on YouTube of cinema speculation, and of course, I've read the book. But I don't know that there's a guy who knows more about movies on the planet today, and I think he's just incredible, and it reflects in the films that he creates. Right? Certainly, you can see his genius, but it's one thing to be a smart guy and know trivia. It's another thing to be a guy who can actually create something using that kind of knowledge. And I think, I think it's underrated how talented that guy is. It's absolutely incredible.
Ethan Hawke is another one that comes to my mind. Maybe not at Tarantino level, but just his knowledge and appreciation of the film. He is a fascinating person to talk to and interview just because of his depth of knowledge that goes. I mean, we often think of these actors as they show up, they read a script, and then that's all they do is they do a performance. But the knowledge and the kind of reverence that they have towards the art of filmmaking, and I think we've lost fact that it is an art.
Yeah, and I think an important thing to remember too is that film is a collaborative art as well. And so, yes, while I'm at home and I've got scripts right now that I'm working on, in fact, I'm back on set here in a day or two, but I can only do so much either by myself or with a reading partner or other actors, right? When I show up on set, suddenly I become not only, how should we say, a new person in the context of the set design, the costumes I'm wearing. The director is going to give me advice, the other actors who've also prepared at home. But I also now record something that will also now go into the hands of the editor and people who are going to do some music along that or whatever other, maybe VFX get put in and all kinds of things. So I've really got to understand that I've got to bring my A game to the table, but I've got to trust those around me to hopefully create something magnificent. And this is why I'm always a little bit, bothered by some of the award shows, especially for people who show up at the Razzies and get trouble for stuff that, they say it was a terrible performance. And you remember a while ago, there was that poor 13-year-old girl that got beaten up over a performance. Well, the reality is she was, first of all, only sharing the words that were on the script. Second, she was only doing the performance as the director asked her to. And third, she was actually acting with other people who would either bring out a better performance or diminish her performance. And then, of course, there's the editor that's going to take his turn at it. So I think it's really unfair to either give too much praise or too much criticism to an actor, a single actor, based on what they've been able to create in film, because it's a collaborative effort. And so, I don't know, I just think the public doesn't really realize that as much when they're watching the film.
Well, I think it's with life in general. I mean, I doubt that there's anyone out there that goes, I'm thinking of making a bad film because I want to win a Razzie. I think, there's studio influences, there's just, the script didn't come together, the director was under too much pressure or didn't have the time to do this or that. There's so many things that go, but I don't think anyone on a crew ever says, I sought out to do a bad job.
Right. And it's interesting. I saw something that someone had said on social media the other day that kind of made sense. They said, rather than seeing all these remakes of big hits, right? Like, not too long ago, we saw Roadhouse remade. And now, of course, you're mentioning about Happy Gilmore coming back and some of the other ones. I think that's great. I'm interested to watch those. Often they do a pretty good job. But I think it would be more interesting to take a film that had a really good story to it, a good premise about it, that maybe just wasn't fully executed well, and try to do a remake of that, right? That might be an interesting experiment to try. But again, people have to make their own decisions of what they want to produce.
So that kind of undercut my next question without you knowing it. You're a character that you've done over the past, now that you've become kind of a bigger name in Hollywood and everywhere, that fans that are just coming to get to know you should go back and watch that you say, maybe didn't get the audience, that you'd love to see them go check this out, the view in it, because you thought the performance was great that audience might not have seen? And is there a role that you'd like to play again from one of those experiences?
Wow, that's interesting. I guess, there's some films that I participated in where I would love to switch roles and try one of the other roles in the film to see how that's worked. And a couple times that's happened. But I'll be honest, I think overall I'm very satisfied with how a lot of the projects that I've been involved in have turned out. Some of them, would I like to see maybe a reboot one day in the future? Perhaps. Would I like to see a sequel? Sometimes. But the reality is I'm not in the habit of really looking back. It's funny when people ask me what's my favorite movie that I've ever been in, my answer is always the next one. As an actor, I'm always looking for what's next. And if it's something that I've already done, oftentimes, it's not that I feel negatively towards that, but I'm like, I've done that already. So let's move on to the next one. And that's kind of I think the way that I look at it is what's next, and, what haven't I done before that I'd like to try. But I won't lie, there are some kind of characters that I've done before that I'm happy to revisit either them or something similar to them. Like I've done a lot of, I think, really kind of macho type characters that are always super fun because obviously I was raised in the generation where we've got these male action heroes and, the James Bonds and the Han Solos and the Indiana Jones and like the Steve McQueen type characters I've always loved. So whenever I get those kind of, roles that make me, I think, cooler than I really am, it's kind of funny. And I love those. In fact, it's funny, for a while, like Hollywood Weekly recently had me on the cover of the magazine. They called me Cinema's Bad Boy. Well, if they saw me at home, they'd see I'm actually kind of boring. I'm not a bad boy at all, but yeah, I do my own stunts. I get it. I shoot guns. I hang out of helicopters. I do all that kind of stuff. I get it. But that's not really who I am as a person. So, yeah, I mean, I'll do more of those roles. I always will say yes to those action ones because they're fun. But recently, I guess here's an example. I just did a movie called Farewell to You that's got Matty Cardripole from Stranger Things and Larry Thomas, who was the suit Nazi in Seinfeld, and all of these things. Well, they asked me to play sort of this dad. I don't do a lot of dad, who's a Portuguese kind of art guy, and he's like a guru of art. And I grew a goatee for it, and I wore these kind of funny glasses, and I had to do sort of this Portuguese accent and stuff. It was super different than anything that I've ever done. And obviously there's zero violence in me except for one scene where I slapped somebody. I won't tell you who that is. You'll have to see the movie. But it was just so unique. But it was a super fun experience to just kind of go that direction with something that I'd never visited before. And so, yeah, I mean, my favorite movie, it's going to be the next one. Whatever it is and whatever challenges show up, let's take a look at it and make some cool choices to just bring that character to life. That's the goal, right?
We love Matty. We just had him on the podcast a couple episodes
ago. Oh, he's a super cool dude. I was just hanging with him in LA, and we're over at his offices there with one of our producing partners, and we're going to be doing a bunch of stuff together coming up. I just love that guy to death. He's awesome.
And one of your answers kind of reminded me, you said there's other roles, other characters you would have liked to play. That reminded me, there's a TV show that no longer airs called Psych. And they ran for, I think, 6 seasons on USA Network. And later on in the series, they took one of their earlier episodes and earlier scripts and used the same characters but kind of mixed up things a little bit to kind of remodernize it or change it up a little bit. But it's basically the same actors using the same kind of script but creating a very different episode, basically repeating itself. And so I think we kind of miss that fun in Hollywood some of these days.
Well, I think that's very similar to what the comic industry started years ago. Like for comic books, DC had a series called What If, and I think Marvel did something very similar where they took, say, the story of Superman. What if he had landed in Russia and became that, or what if Bruce Wayne's parents didn't die? And I think that those kind of what ifs are really quite fun to think about. Yeah, I mean, I would love to do films like that take something that we all traditionally know and then spin it on its head. I do think we need to be careful, though, because the audience does have expectations, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when Snow White comes out, because obviously that's changed quite a bit. And I think, some people hold that character so closely that you've got to, I think, identify whether you're going to allow those stories to become canon or whether they're, again, a what if kind of story. Because we know that, like when DC did it, we knew what they were doing, right? We knew that it was not going to become canon and change the things that we love. And it was just a fun point of view. But I think when you start like taking the stuff that people love and adore and you're messing with it to an extent where it's now, canon and reshaping that whole legacy of that creature or character, I think you're in real trouble. You got to be real careful about that stuff.
There's a, God, I wish I could remember the name. There's a musician who was talking about how over the years, do you get tired of singing the same song, or do you want to change it up? And he said for a while there's one of his songs that he did change up, and he started talking to fans, and that was the fans' first date that they went on, hearing that song, or their first kiss. And he goes, for me, I can't change it up anymore because it ruins that memory for them. And so I understand the appreciation of, I need to keep it as it is. As much as a performance, I would love to mix it up or play it faster or slow it down. To that fan, there's so much emotion tied to that character. And I think in Hollywood, too, we have that for certain characters that you can't kind of...
Well, on that, I think it's really important. It's something that my own father taught me. My dad's really smart. I just love him to death, and he's got always good ideas. But he's never really been involved in the movie business, right? So one of the things that he told me once, probably when I was younger, I was in a movie and I didn't really like how it turned out. It happens to every actor, trust me. Like, you'll do a movie, you've got high expectations, and all of a sudden when you see it, you're like, oh dear. And I was kind of just with my family being kind of vocal about it. And my dad pulled me aside and he said, you know what, you got to stop that. And then he explained that, again, just like you had said here, that particular film could have special significance on an emotional level for somebody else. And it really means something to them, whether you like it or not. And he said, don't go wreck it for somebody else just because you didn't like it. Try to always speak highly of the projects that you're in, whether you enjoy them or not, and let the audience decide. And if they like it, let them have that. If they don't like it, let them have that too. But just don't, speak negatively of whatever you've been on. And the truth is, as I've been thinking about that, I don't know. I mean, just the fact that I get to work on movies is a blessing as it is. So I really can't be upset that, I'm in a movie that I didn't like. The truth is, I'm in a movie. And it is kind of funny that, I did have somebody once tell me that they didn't like a film that I was in, and they were pretty vocal about it. And it got me down. And I went and chatted with one of my friends. And it was a movie that I, in fact, actually produced too, right? So this was even more painful. It was when I was talking with my friend Brent about it, and Brent says, you know what, don't worry about it. No matter what somebody says, the thing they cannot take away is the fact that you are in a movie or you made a movie, right? So just remember that, 90% of these negative comments either come from a place of ignorance or jealousy. And I think that that also applies when we criticize our own movies, right? We get upset because we're jealous that maybe somebody else had a different part or a different opportunity in the film. And the reality is we should just be thankful that we're part of this experience.
So you had Mafia Spies, which came out earlier this year.
Yep.
And right now you have Black Creek and Tenants just recently came out. Tell us a little bit overview of those three.
Okay, well, I guess we could start with Mafia Spies. That was a super fun experience. I loved working with everybody in that film, especially the director, Tom Donahue, super cool guy. And I loved it. And for those who haven't seen it, when you do see it, it really will get you rethinking a lot about American history and some of the things that we've been taught and told, because it's not entirely accurate. And now that some of those documents are becoming declassified, I think you'll be surprised. Obviously, the title does refer to some of these secrets I'm referring to. Mafia Spies, well, yeah, there was a time in the history of our existence that the CIA partnered with the Mafia, and their intention was to assassinate Fidel Castro. And it's a very interesting story. So I'm going to encourage everybody to watch that. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but I promise you'll be very surprised. Tenants, we shot not too long ago. It's a scary movie anthology. So if you remember films like Twilight Zone, the movie, and Creep Show and things like that, where they had several stories in, the film. This is kind of like that, and I think they've done a really good job with it. There's a lot of neat, creepy stories and some things that I think are just like in Twilight Zone the movie, even heartfelt, but very mysterious and strange that you wouldn't see this story coming. I will maybe give a little bit of a spoiler alert here. I play a bad guy in it, and I'm not very nice. That was a really interesting situation for me to do what I did in that film. It's not who I am in real life, but the cool thing is my character does get what he deserves, and it's a little bit entertaining there. You're going to laugh at that, so it's quite fun. Right now, that's actually streaming. It just went live, I think about a week ago. And the funny thing is, I was looking on Apple. I mean, it's on several platforms, but I was looking on Apple, and it's currently on sale, which is pretty cool. So if you want to check that out, I would encourage you getting it for the end of the Halloween season. And that's tenants, just like an apartment tenant. But last week, on the 9th of October, we had the premiere of Black Creek. And Black Creek is a Western movie that was created by Cynthia Rothrock. Some of you might know she's a legendary martial artist, and she brought along a lot of her friends, everybody from Don the Dragon Wilson to Keith Cook, who you know from Mortal Kombat, to Richard Norton, who's done all kinds of movies. In fact, he was in Furiosa and Fury Road and a bunch of other ones, but done tons of great martial arts films. And Patrick Fitzpatrick, who you've probably seen in everything from Remo Williams to Under Siege Part 2 to you name it. And in that, I played kind of this, what's a good word for it? The director used this word, and sort of the writer, swarmy. I'm not really sure what that means, but I was a swarmy kind of weird kind of dude who basically played all the angles for his own benefit. The character's name was Hank Winslow. Basically what I do is I run a gambling ring on the Wild Wild West, and I make people fight each other. And I'm not very good and nice about it. I'm not kind. I get Cynthia's character fighting a lot of people with the hopes that she's going to croak. I want to see her dead. Yeah, as you can imagine, she's the hero, so probably not going to work out. But it's interesting to see some of those fights. Oh, we've got our Marcus Taylor in there as well, who you might remember from Straight Outta Compton and stuff like that. So he's one of my favorite fights in it. I thought he did a great job. But there's a lot of really cool stuff going on in there. It's kind of like the Expendables, but for the martial arts community, I guess. So yeah, that just came out, and I expect it's going to do quite well.
Then you have a busy future come up. You're listed on a lot of things coming up. Is there anything in particular that you want the fans seeing?
Well, I just was on set, I guess, day before yesterday on Alien Horde for Mahal Empire. I played one of the bad guys in that too. Boy, it seems like I'm always the bad guy here. I don't want to give away what's happening with that, but had guys like Vernon Wells and James Duvall and Andrew Dikoff and some pretty cool people that we had in that film. I've got one more day that I'm on that film. So right now I'm in Vancouver, but I fly back to LA on the 23rd, and I've got just the 24th left remaining on that film. I think that's going to be a great one. With the Mahals, I also did Bikers versus Werewolves, so that's coming out soon. They've had a really big success with Arena Wars, especially on Paramount Plus right now. So I'm excited to see what these other films will be like for us. I also have Clean Right Hook coming up, which I think is awesome. We shot that one in England, and that one should be coming out fairly soon too. I play a gangster by the name of Archie Baker. It's kind of a quirky story, but kind of in the style of like a Guy Ritchie type, European gangster type film. So I think that one's going to do really well, and it's super fun to be involved in. Chris Sanders is the director of that. I've actually worked with multiple times, and so it's kind of fun being back with him. And then right now we're just in the process of completing the final distribution kind of deal with the movie Jackknife. And Jackknife we actually shot with Adam Jack. I've done 3 movies with him as well already. Jackknife, I play a really kind of cool villain, but the story is so good in that film, and we won a lot of film festival awards because of that story. And kind of the story behind it, I think, I guess the best way to describe it, it's kind of a neat reflection on what we're kind of dealing with in our society. So we've got 2 black teenagers that are raised by a white mother, and they're raised in a community that has some significant stereotypes racially. And so kind of what happens is there's some crime that happens in the city, which they get blamed for. Technically, that's me and my brother are the ones who are the real culprits. In the end, these two teens end up, because of the accusations, end up fleeing. And as they flee to kind of find protection, obviously their mother is concerned. The law enforcement wants them for questioning on these things, and they happen to steal something that belongs to me and my criminal brother. So all three of us are now chasing these two kids. It doesn't necessarily end how you think it's going to end, but it's a really interesting reflection on how our society sort of deals with these things. So I'm very, very proud of that film.
Well, Douglas,
Yeah.
thank you for joining us. Despite the Hollywood Reporter and all your roles, you are a sincere, nice guy. So
Well, thanks.
thank you for joining us and sharing some of your wisdom. I'm looking forward to checking out Black Creek and Tenants on Apple TV for Tenants, and looking forward to seeing what the rest of your career brings you.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say.
That does it for this episode. Thank you for listening to the Staffa Corner.